Oceans cover well over 2/3 of the planet's surface and are home to a world where at least 1 million known species of plants and animals depend on each other for survival. Small marine organisms are food for larger fish that are in turn consumed by even larger fish that eventually fall victim to top predators. Humans have relied on this entire food chain for sustenance for a very long time. Fishermen use a wide range of methods and gear to land their catch, and each type has its own effects on the environment, health of the fish, and ultimately health of the consumers. By selecting the most appropriate method in each situation, the fishing industry can help minimize its impact on the environment and maximize our health. While there are many methods of catching fish in the wild, as well as various fish farming methods, I'm going to highlight a few of each. For the wild-caught methods, I will discuss seines, trawling, dredges, gill nets, and pots. And for fish farming methods, I'm going to highlight net pens, ponds, and recirculating tanks. Seines are long nets with ropes on each end, which herd fish when dragged or towed. They're hauled over sandy or muddy bottom habitats, and the cloud of sediment helps herd the fish into the net. Seines are suspended vertically in the water with floats and weights, and some have a bag for catching fish. Bottom trawls are cone-shaped nets that are pulled along the seafloor by 1 or 2 boats to catch cod, halibut, lobster, rockfish, or shrimp. The variety and amount of non-targeted ocean life that's caught in many bottom trawl fisheries is a pervasive problem, and the heavy gear can damage sensitive seafloor habitat. Reducing the harmful effects of bottom trawling requires limiting when and where trawling can occur. Dredges are metal-framed baskets that are dragged across the seafloor to collect clams, mussels, oysters, scallops, and sea cucumbers. Tow dredges scrape or dig into the substrate with rakes or teeth about 1 foot deep. Gill nets are walls of stationary or drifting netting that are almost invisible to fish, so species like cod, merch, salmon, and trout swim right into them. Set, drift, and tremel gill nets use different configurations of floats and weights to suspend the netting more or less vertically. Fixed gill nets are stretched between 2 or more stakes that are driven into the seabed. Pots are cages or baskets that hold species such as lobsters, crabs, and cod alive until fishermen can return the halt in the catch. Pots have 1 or more openings and are used with or without bait. They're usually placed on the seafloor, but some are designed to be in midwater. While unwanted species can be released alive and habitat impacts tend to be minimal, the entanglement of whales and other species are a serious conservation concern in some pot fisheries. Marine and freshwater net pens are enclosed on the bottom and sides by wooden mesh or net screens. Net pens are open systems that are in direct contact with the surrounding environment. Salmon, tilapia, and tuna are a few species that are farmed in net pens. Ponds enclose fish and crustaceans in a coastal or inland body of fresh or salt water. They vary considerably from simple, extensive farms to high-tech, hyper-intense farms with much higher production rates. Recirculating tanks have continuous water flow, and the wastewater is pumped throughout treatment systems that clean the water before returning to the tank. These systems can be indoor or outdoor, and they're usually above ground. They also can minimize or avoid discharge of pollutants beyond the farms. The potential for disease and parasite transfer to the natural environment is low, and escapes of farmed fish can be prevented. Many finfish, such as Arctic char, striped bass, can be raised in land-based recirculating tanks. So what do you think of when you think of farmed fishing? How about wild-caught fishing? Oftentimes people think of farmed fishing as inhumane, unsanitary, and unsustainable. And people associate wild-caught fishing as fresher, healthier, and more economically friendly. Let's take a closer look at some of these misconceptions. Now, let's talk about some of the misconceptions about wild-caught fishing, as many people think wild-caught fishing is a more sustainable practice. One of the biggest problems with wild-caught fishing is overfishing, which occurs when more fish are caught in the population than can be replaced through natural reproduction. Gathering as many fish as possible may seem like a profitable practice, but overfishing has serious consequences that not only affect the balance of life in oceans, but also the socio-economic well-being of coastal communities, especially in developing countries who depend on fish for profit. One significant issue, rather than easing the impact on wild populations, is the fish farming. Fish farms often depend on wild-caught fish species that are lower on the food chain, like anchovies, in order to feed the larger fish species. It can take up to 5 pounds of smaller fish to produce 1 pound of a fish like a salmon or sea bass. Overfishing of these smaller forage fish has repercussions throughout the ocean ecosystem. Today, each person eats on average 19.2 kilograms of fish a year, around twice as much as 50 years ago. Over just 40 years, there have been a decrease in recorded marine species of 39%. Another issue associated with wild-caught fishing is the carbon footprint it creates. The food we eat accounts for about a quarter of the world's carbon footprint and mostly comes from farming crops and raising livestock. However, catching wild seafood from the ocean requires fuel for traveling hundreds of thousands of miles, and refrigeration of seafood products create a substantial carbon footprint. Generally, we see somewhere between 60 and 90% of the carbon footprint of a fishery is associated with the fuel itself. So the other 10 to 40% are these non-fuel sources of emissions. So what are the emissions associated with that? Well, let's think about the gear, the trawls, the traps, the nets, as well as the different chemicals on boards, as well as generating electricity and using refrigerators to keep your product cool. However, there is some good news. Overfishing in the U.S. has reached an all-time low as of May 2018. The overfishing list at the end of 2017 included 30 stocks, and the overfished list included 35 stocks. Overall, 91% of U.S. marine fish stocks are not subject to overfishing, and 87% are not overfished. A stock is on the overfishing list when the harvest rate is high, a direct result of fishing activities. A stock is on the overfish list when the population size of a stock is too low, whether because of fishing or other causes, such as environmental changes. Another misconception is that wild-caught fish are always healthier. Wild-caught fish can often be healthier because they are less contaminated from the man-made toxins, and they feed on a natural diet of smaller fish and algae and come in contact with less bacteria and parasites. However, this depends on where they are caught and the amount of pollution in the area they are caught. The downside is that many large wild fish are high in mercury, and poor fishing methods can harm the ocean and cause this to increase. Now let's examine some of the misconceptions of fish farming. One of the most common misconceptions is the inhumane treatment of the fish at fish farms. While every farm is unique, it is in the farmer's best interest to keep their farming conditions as beneficial to their fish as possible. Fish naturally school in close groups, so even when there is a lot of space, these conditions may appear to be more cramped than they actually are. Dirty and diseased fish do not profit the farmers, and fish welfare linked to the healthy environmental practice is becoming more of a priority. Sustainable fish farming is becoming more prevalent in the U.S. For example, aquaponic farms, where fish and plants grow together in a closed-loop system, as well as recirculating farms, which are land-based systems that use nutrient-rich water. These systems can be built indoor and outdoor and in schools or urban cities. The benefits include bringing locally grown fish to the market, creating green jobs, and exposing local food systems. Another misconception about fish farming are that farmed fish are always the unhealthier option and wild-caught fish are the way to go. Nearly 90% of wild fish stocks are overfished or completely depleted, and responsible aquaculture or fish farms is an emerging and viable alternative to support the global demand for fish. Responsible fish farms do not use hormones, antibiotics, chemicals, or additives. Responsible water usage means only taking up a small portion of its surface and monitoring the water quality. These farmed fish eat a balanced diet of primarily vegetable-based feed and are often fed algae, which is the same food that fish in the wild eat. Farms reduce waste by finding new uses for parts of fish that would otherwise be discarded. Now let's examine some of the policies and regulations in the U.S. The FDA operates a mandatory safety program for all fish and fishery products under the provisions of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, as well as the Public Health Service Act. The FDA program includes research, inspection, compliance, enforcement, outreach, and the development of regulations and guidance. In 1969, the Stratton Commission conducted the nation's first policy review, recommending the creation of the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. This resulted in marine resources being governed by a dozen agencies and departments and more than 140 laws, which is called the Magnuson-Stevens Act. This act is the primary law governing marine fisheries management in the U.S. federal waters. This fosters long-term biological and economic sustainability, and the key objective of this is to prevent overfishing, rebuild overfished stocks, increase long-term economic and social benefits, and ensure a safe and sustainable supply of seafood. In terms of seafood harvesting across the world, Asia dominates the global aquaculture production, accounting for 89%. China alone counts for 62% of the global aquaculture production. In the U.S., it has not kept its pace with production increases in other parts of the world, ranking 13th in the total aquaculture production. This is why so much of our fish is imported, and this needs to be taken seriously. For example, in China, some of the fish farms are right next to pig farms, and some of the pig manure leaks into the fish farms and contaminates their water. This is why it's so important to purchase sustainable fish. So what can you do to ensure you're eating quality fish? Well, for starters, you can check the country of origin label, also known as the COOL label, that's labeled on the back of any fish or seafood product. Be careful because this label can be deceptive, as it includes where the fish was caught as well as where it was packaged. So a fish might have been caught in China, but it was packaged in the US, so make sure to check your labels thoroughly. Another option is to download an app called Seafood Watch by Monterey Bay Aquarium. This is one of the most reputable and well-known sources about seafood sustainability and provides the consumer exact guidelines that each country has to follow regarding their seafood. It also has another option where you can enter in a specific seafood or fish you're going to purchase, and it tells you the country of origin and where it's purchased. This is a helpful tool to look for your seafood.
Right then, the meeting has officially come to order. Let us all say the pledge. I am a nice shark, not a mindless eating machine. If I am to change this image, I must first change myself. Fish are friends, not food.